Hello, this is Jeanette Shaliga with VGA, and we are celebrating our 5th birthday today. And our next presentation is shared by Janice Sellers, and she is going to be sharing the story about the tale of two brothers, the Patriot and the Outlaw. So Janice, thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you very much. So the Patriot and the Outlaw is about my ancestor, who I can proudly say is the Patriot, and his brother, who was not such a nice guy. Let's see, are you going to behave yourself, computer? Come on. There. So we have two brothers, the Mulliners. Joseph Mulliner was born about 1735. Still haven't found anything concrete. We know for sure he died August 8th, 1781. And then Moses Mulliner was born about 1740. And he died on January 18th, 1821. So he lived 40 years past his brother. That's a big difference, and we'll find out why. Now, the Mulliners were English and came to Little Egg Harbor, which is in New Jersey, before the Revolutionary War. The immigrants were Moses and Joseph Mulliner. Joseph Mulliner was the notorious refugee leader known in history as the Pine Barrens Bandit. And apparently he is very well known in the state of New Jersey. He's not known to have had any children. He had a wife, but no one seems to have recorded her name. Again. After his execution, Joe Mulliner was buried in the forest near Potato Furnace in Washington Township, New Jersey. Now, Moses Mulliner, the other brother, was a worthy man and enlisted as a soldier in the Continental Army. He went as a substitute for Job, the son of Nehemiah Mathis, Sr. Moses Mulliner married Mary Holden, an English woman. Moses Mulliner's children were John, Rebecca, and Nancy. Now, this is actually a quotation from the record that I've listed there. Oh, wait, I've got the nav bars in my way. There we go. Constitution, bylaws, list of members of the Surveyors Association of West New Jersey. So I found these little bits about my ancestor, Moses Mulliner, who I had read was in the Revolutionary War, and I started trying to find out more about him. And I find out that his brother was this disreputable person. I actually asked my sister when I found out about this, because she was raised in New Jersey, and she had heard of the Pine Barrens Bandit, and she thought it was so cool that we were related to him. But first, I started off with my ancestor, and he is listed in DAR. He is still an approved Patriot. Nobody's found anything to discount his service. One of these days, I need to order his file. I still haven't done that yet. Says his service description, Captain John Ross, Colonel Dayton, 3rd Regiment, also a drummer. Now, he's a little old for a drummer. Usually you tend to think of drummers as being younger boys who maybe can't fight as well. But I got a copy of his pension file. It still lists him as a drummer. It's very consistent. Here's the list of the men in the unit. Drummers, Moses Mulliner, discharged November 19th. So consistently across the board, he's a drummer. Still trying to verify that. One of the possibilities for that, because it's like, why is somebody in his 30s a drummer? Definitely not as common. Some sources say that the family was Quaker, and it's possible, if they really were Quaker, that he was a drummer to support the revolution, but not have to fight, because Quakers are pacifists. One time when I was talking about this family, I had somebody get up in my face and say they weren't Quakers, but he never explained what his source was. So I'm still working on that. As Christine was saying, there's always more research to be done and more information to be found. Now, eventually, after the revolution was over, the government finally decided that they would offer pensions to the men who had fought and helped give us our country. So Moses went in and requested a pension because, well, you know, he was a little older, he needed some help. So on the 7th May, 1818, personally appears Moses Mulliner, age 77 years, resident in Tuckerton, Little Egg Harbor Township, who doth on his oath make the following declaration in order to obtain the provision made by the late, very late, Act of Congress entitled "An Act to Provide for Certain Persons Engaged in the Land and Naval Forces of the United States in the Revolutionary War." So he enlisted in 1775 in Little Egg Harbor in New Jersey. The group was the Jersey Group, commanded by Captain John Ross. He joined the 3rd Regiment, commanded by Colonel Dayton, performed the duty of a drummer, was still absolutely consistent, from Mount Holly, which is where my grandfather was born. They didn't go very far, to Skeensburg and Ticonderoga, where he was discharged about a year from the time of enlistment. So here's the jacket for his request. Private, I still haven't figured out what that says, but it says Dayton's something. New Jersey, 75, he was in 1 year. Further proof of service is required. Enter office. Fine. We'll go off and get further proof. Supplementary evidence concerning Moses Mulliner. So he found men who were in his unit who were still alive, amazingly enough. John Guy came in, said he became acquainted with Moses in March 1776. Mulliner did the duty of a drummer in Captain John Ross's company. 1819. He also found Samuel A.J., who I found out that's one of those names that's all over New Jersey, because they say Pennsylvania's the Quaker state. Nah, New Jersey. You cannot go anywhere in New Jersey without tripping over Quakers. Who also became acquainted with Moses Mulliner in the last of March or the 1st of April, 1776. Mulliner was at that time an enlisted soldier in Captain John Ross's company. The good news is everything's consistent. Nobody's disagreeing with each other. And then he had to give more evidence about why he needed this, because this was before the days when you simply got a pension because you served. You had to need a pension. The government has changed its opinion about these things, obviously. So I have no other income other than one lot of land, 60 feet by 60 with one old wooden house, 1 story high, 15 by 18 feet, in which I have only a life estate. So apparently he doesn't actually own it. It belongs to someone else, but he's allowed to live there until he dies. Furniture and household goods, no family except my wife, about my own age. I am not able to maintain myself by labor. Now, he signed this on August 8th, 1820, so he's about 80 years old and struggling to get by. Moses Mulliner, Little Egg Harbor, a private in the regiment commanded by Colonel Dayton, inscribed on the roll of New Jersey at the rate of $8 per month to commence 7th May, 1818. They actually made it retroactive for as long as they dragged it out. Because let me see it, go back there. He did this on August 8th, 1820. They did make it retroactive back to when he applied. $8 per month is actually not a bad amount of money for the time. And then he shows up on the list of pensioners. These are actually in government publications that have been digitized and are online free. So you can often Google your name because as was earlier mentioned during the quiz about OCR, these are all OCR'd and they're searchable. So try Googling your name and see if you show up in some of these government publications. But he shows up on the list. He was a private for New Jersey. And then we get another one. Oops. Died January 18th, 1821. You also get these lists with the pensions. They will say who's no longer on the pension list. So he applied in 1818 when it became available. They finally approved him 2 years later. At least they made it retroactive. And then he died the next year. So he got 3 years of pensions. There's a lovely little index card saying that the final voucher payment was done on the second quarter of 1821. I have not found a date for his wife's death. Still working on that. Records for Jersey around this period are a little sketchy. Okay, now we have the outlaw, the more fascinating part of the family, right? So this is a handwritten pension application from a man named Simon Lucas. Your petitioner will mention his house was set on fire during his absence. by a party of the enemy headed by a Tory and refugee by the name of Joseph Mulliner, who commanded a British boat. He did much mischief and inspired terror by making incursions into the country bordered by Egg Harbor River. Your petitioner with a party of men was in pursuit of him at the very time he fired my house. He was afterwards taken prisoner, tried, and executed at Burlington. So he has a legend within the state of New Jersey. This particular one this write-up came during the Works Progress Administration Federal Writers Project during the Depression. One of the things that they had people do was go around and collect folklore and historical tales. And so somebody in New Jersey wrote about Joseph Mulliner. An episode reported from the life. Joe Mulliner was the Atlantic County Robin Hood. So by the time we've hit the Depression, now he's been glorified a little more. The time he was just running around and stealing stuff from people. Now he's a Robin Hood. You know, we embroider these things as history goes on. So Honore Reed issued invitations for a party, and apparently Joe was enamored of the young lady. So we have his record in shaking down wealthy landowners and local tycoons was a more important social consideration than his helpfulness to the poor. And that's assuming he was really helpful to the poor. But apparently he went and kidnapped her on the day of the party. And she did get returned that night. He brought her back, and nothing else was ever said about what exactly happened during that incident. Now, because his reputation seems to have changed in the intervening 150 some odd years, we don't actually know if this incident occurred, but he's still being written about 150 years later. In 1946, the San Antonio Light did a full-page story about him. Now, this is San Antonio, Texas. There is no San Antonio that I know of in New Jersey. And talked about what a great guy he was. And, oh, he was really fascinating. And he went around and he was Robin Hood. They're still saying nice things about him. They did a documentary on PBS in New Jersey. And they had Joe Mulliner there. When I was Googling for information, because I'll just Google names, especially if it's an uncommon name, it's a really good way to search for things that might show up that you would not even think of looking for. Like this. There's a comic book about the Jersey Devil, which is a often told tale about one of the creatures that's supposed to be in Jersey. And for whatever reason, the comic book artist did a sub-series on Joe Mulliner. And I found that by Googling his name. And of course, well, I'm obsessive. I'm a genealogist. I had to go out and buy copies of them. And you can see the artist actually signed his copies for me. Now, he said JD lives, so he's more focused on the Jersey Devil, but he did a whole little series on Joseph Mulliner consorting with the Jersey Devil. One of the interesting things about people who get this kind of reputation is people want souvenirs about them. So at various times, tombstones have been erected for Joseph Mulliner, and then people steal them because they want a souvenir. But it always gets replaced. Now this, as far as I know, is the current one. They seem to have made it a little sturdier, and it seems to have stayed a little longer. He has a lovely entry on Find a Grave. And, you know, a lot of these sources are good for lots of different things. So, you know, Christine Cohen found her Australian cousins there, and I found Joseph Mulliner. They have a little quote from the New Jersey Gazette. At a special court lately held in Burlington, a certain Joseph Mulliner was convicted of high treason, sentenced to be hanged to this very day. One may assume this was published in the morning, possibly. Had become the terror of that part of the county, made a practice of burning houses, robbing, and plundering. So in the time period, he was not a Robin Hood. He was not a very nice person. Both Whigs and Tories now considered him their enemy. burial. It's called the Joseph Mulliner gravesite. It is essentially a tourist attraction in Atlantic County, New Jersey. But my ancestor, the Patriot, we don't know where he's buried. Nobody has a record of it. Possibly, I found one thing that said he might have been buried in a Quaker Meeting House burial ground. No tombstone. Certainly no tombstone anybody's been replacing as it's been stolen. Now, as I said, he's my ancestor. He's my 5th great-grandfather. One of the nice things about having patriots as ancestors is there's lots of documentation for them. So other than the fact that his daughter, Rebecca, I teach a whole class about finding maiden names and finding what happened to women because we don't know when she was born or when she died. But all the way down there, I do, because she married Hananiah Gaunt, who had Hananiah Sellers Gaunt, James Gaunt. I have photos of James, Thomas Kirkland Gaunt, my grandmother, Anna Gaunt. Certainly lots of photos of my father, Bertram Lynn Sellers, and then there's me. Now, what's interesting about the Outlaw, too, as I said, not only is he the one people remembers nowadays, there is something called the International Black Sheep Society. You don't have to be a descendant. They accept siblings. So all of my siblings thought it was really cool that we could become members in the International Black Sheep Society based on the Pine Barrens Bandit. So sometimes you get more information about your family by researching the bad guys because people like to write about bad guys. It's kind of a depressing thing in its own little way, but it's fun finding those ancestors and finding out more information about your family, even if it's around the corner instead of directly. And